Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed nearly 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. And I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience, as well as more meaningful conversations. Which brings me to this week's episode and the 61st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. And I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Duncan Moss. Duncan is a clinical psychologist whose approach draws from long-standing psychological perspectives and also from methods of meditation and the traditions of contemplation and awareness. He has been a student in the Tibetan tradition for many years. Simply put, this was the exact type of conversation I was looking to capture when I started this project. Duncan has a wonderful mix of wisdom, experience, and the humility to explore what was present for him in the moment of this discussion, all while sharing valuable insights from his own research and personal inquiries. This entire conversation is a beautiful exploration of the disturbances we can feel in life, accepting their inevitable appearances, and a nod to the correlation between slowing down and expressing kindness towards ourselves. We discuss Duncan's present explorations into the work of Eckhart Tolle and our resistance to suffering, letting go, and surrendering. We also explore themes such as our monkey minds, suffering as a teacher, and the timelessness of the present moment. If you are presently suffering from any discontent in your life, this episode will be highly illuminating and potentially soothing to listen along to. It won't magically fix whatever you are presently perceiving or experiencing, but perhaps it will give you space to observe and accept it and befriend whatever experience you are presently going through. Look, as I mentioned, this is the exact type of conversation I was looking to capture on this podcast. There's something incredibly enlivening about having this type of conversation with someone who has got so much practice and experience in fields of self-inquiry, and yet is so willing to explore and share what is presently coming up for them in the moment. So I found there's something very therapeutic about the process of taking part in this conversation. So I'm sure you're going to take a lot from this conversation too. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, I really appreciate it if you continue to leave your lovely reviews, as it greatly helps me and supports me at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 61st episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Duncan, thank you very much for joining me today. As I mentioned to you in our little pre-chat there, I've been very much looking forward and intrigued to see where this conversation goes. So thanks for your time today.
No, it's a real pleasure. Thank you.
So as I've mentioned to you before, the question that I usually kick these things off with is the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yeah, that's a powerful question in itself. Yeah, that's a hard one. I think there's on a surface level, there are probably lots of questions that come and go. I think in a deeper level, I think a question for me that perhaps resonates with others is, why am I suffering right now? Why now? Why is this emerging now in my life?
Right, it's a highly resonant question. Just if you were to even explore the first one, why am I suffering right now? What comes up with that question?
Well, it's in some ways, obviously, it's a painful question to ask because it sort of speaks to a kind of yearning not to suffer, and speaks to the immediate pain that we may be experiencing, emotional or physical. So there's kind of hope and fear in that question. There's the hope that if I could answer the question, I wouldn't suffer, and the fear that I can't answer the question. And it's not a question that I catch myself asking consciously, but I suspect it's sort of there in the background when I look at the way I live. Particularly say if I'm having a difficult time, it's suffering in the broadest sense, just that kind of dissatisfaction or particular difficulties, and a kind of, it's not just curiosity, it's there can be a kind of desperation.
So when you said that, the sense or the sentiment that kind of came up for me was like, even if life it can be going pretty well, like we just almost have these antennas for okay, what do I perceive as causing me dis-ease or discomfort in my life?
Yeah.
How can I fix that?
Yeah.
So I'm really kind of curious about even holding that space for suffering and acknowledging its existence while still in the context of a life that I could still see as meaningful, worthwhile, or
Mm.
I'm saying good life for the sake of the discussion we're
Mm.
having, but not in a very kind of rudimentary judgment of life as good or bad in that sense.
Yeah.
When you think of it, is this a persistent kind of uh, expression or presence? Because for me, in some ways, if I was honest, I probably would say it's kind of persistent. Like I'm looking, in some ways, I'm looking for problems. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's persistent, very persistent. I mean, one of the people that I'm very inspired by, a Tibetan Buddhist writer, calls it monkey mind. Monkey mind is always looking for threats. And, to be kind, that is a helpful part of ourselves. It's there when we're crossing the road, thank goodness. But it can have a kind of persistent quality I'm not really that informed by the kind of evolutionary ideas, but maybe 40,000 years ago, the kind of threats that we were experiencing are different from now, and that's one way of looking at it. Another way is just that it's part of the human experience to notice dissatisfaction, notice those things that just aren't okay, whether in the background or the foreground, and to be kind of poking at them and kind of, it's like touching a bruise. Touching it actually hurts and it doesn't really help heal the bruise, but still we go to the bruise. I think that's a very human thing. If we've got bruise on our skin, we'll often find ourselves, pushing at it, touching it.
oh, that's a gorgeous image or metaphor for it. But I think you've also said something that resonates a lot for me in that I think there is a lot of relief as well in the acknowledgement that this may be a continuous background noise sometimes. And the way you're saying sometimes it's at the foreground and sometimes it's
Mm,
in the background. I think something that disturbs me a little bit at times in a lot of, let's say, pop psychology interpretations and like a reaching or a seeking of happiness. I think we're rejecting certain elements of the human experience that in trying to rid ourselves of them, we're perpetuating more of the suffering upon ourselves.
yes, yes, no, that's yeah. I mean, it's interesting, that term pop psychology, isn't it? It's like, what does that cover? I just have to own that I've recently been absolutely addicted to Eckhart Tolle, who I'm sure you've come across, and many, many people have, because he's like, he's a superstar. And I have to be honest and say, actually, there is a lot of nuance to Eckhart Tolle. I wouldn't describe him as pop psychology, although he's massively popular. So if I was to channel Eckhart Tolle for a moment, I think he would say, yeah, we do have that background and we can witness it and see it for what it is. And that's okay.
If there was a moment there, I was going to ask you, I thought you were going to ask me, what do I mean by pop psychology? And I just
No,
fleeting
I
moment
wouldn't,
of fear going,
wouldn't,
geez, I have no idea.
no,
I
no,
use the term.
no. I do too. It's like, and only one day different things could come under that category. And certainly, someone like Eckhart Tolle could be described as pop psychology, but it's just, that's not been my experience of encountering him myself.
No, definitely not. But there's something interesting in his approach that I think sometimes when someone's had such an potential, like for how I'm perceiving it, such a revelation or such a moment of seeing,
Hmm.
I almost think that he's like, I've had these thoughts in my head listening to him where I've literally gone to what seems like one of the most benign and benevolent, lovely human beings I've listened to and going, oh, fuck off, Eckhart. Like, because he's just told me to let go again. And I don't, like, his experience was this, almost absolute immense struggling and being in a really low place, and then almost suddenly a letting go in the kind of white heat of suffering.
Yes.
Whereas that doesn't
Yes.
lend so well to just telling me to or suggesting just to let go, even though ultimately I think he's absolutely correct in what he's saying.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. On the other hand, I would rather hear him say "let go," who at least he's got the
Yeah.
experience of it, than those people who tell me to let go, who don't look like they've ever really kind of hit the that painful ground in any kind of persistent way. But yeah, I think the word surrender that he uses a lot is a really tricky word, even more than acceptance. So yeah, I can resonate with that kind of, I just don't want to hear this. I can't hear this, and and it's easy to say these things. To actually live them is obviously, as he acknowledges, is not easy.
From your experience and your inquiries and investigations, like what would surrendering look like or entail?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, another way of putting it would be to welcome what arises. That's one other way of. I actually find that harder because it's like, why would I want to welcome this? This is horrible. I don't want to welcome it. But that's another way it could be described. Another way is just to be with what arises. That's a kind of simpler, but really surrender. Yeah, it's a loaded word. It's like it links with giving, give up, let go, be taken over by. I mean, in wars, that's surrendering to the enemy. Um, I don't feel that at ease with the word. No, acceptance. I kind of, if it's in the moment, you think, "Oh, I can, just about let this in. Surrender. It's got a more kind of total kind of feeling. But I think another way of looking at it is, we can't do surrender. We can't do it. We can only be it. And doing wants to do being, but it can't. We can, so it's like, I just come back to being. Maybe when we're more in a being place, we're in a more surrendered place just by the quality of being.
I wish I didn't have to speak now, and I could just listen to what you just said there in a loop. We can't do surrender. It can be in our being, and I think that's really the crux of that. I never heard
Yeah.
it put that way.
Yeah, I think that is. I think I got this from someone else. I don't know who it was. I'm in a bit of a deep dive with this stuff at the moment, but whoever it was that said we can't do being, I kind of thought, God, that's what I'm trying to do all the time.
If you're anything like me, while serenely pretending to be,
Yeah, yeah, I'm working really hard at this. I'm working really hard at this, and it's not working. So I'm working really hard at it, and it's not working. Um,
but that it's funny. The moment you said surrender, the image that came into my mind was a waving of a white flag,
yeah,
and I don't know, like maybe even picking up the thread of what Eckhart Tolle might say in terms of just like letting go, or the ego not being in such an influential part in our
mm,
life. Maybe like the word of surrender is almost what we need in a way to almost shake us, or to rattle us.
yes, yes. That's another way of looking at it. It's a more loaded word, and I think Eckhart Tolle would say yes, it needs to be, because within his way of looking at things, ego is running our lives, so much in so many kind of tricksy kind of ways. that, surrender, it's got more, it takes you somewhere, for me, it takes me somewhere right in my sort of sternum. It kind of goes, rather than acceptance, you can kind of, but meanwhile, the thoughts are kind of running the show. Surrender, it's more pointed. It's pointed. It points at something.
Because acceptance almost gets me on another bit of an ego kick in that and I'm not trying to ego, but I don't like that part on ego bad, bad good, this sort of stuff. But the acceptance kind of makes me kind of puff myself up a little bit and go, I'm very tolerant. Do you know what I mean? There's something about me that's quite, even I guess when you said the word welcome, what is arising, like even that makes me feel, I'm welcoming.
I think you can virtue signal acceptance, but I don't think you can virtue signal surrender. Because it wouldn't look good. It wouldn't look good, which is the point. It's got that more naked, raw feeling, I think.
When you said that, obviously surrender is something, it's more a being than a doing, and you said you were going really deep into this sense, and you'd heard something recently. What's that inquiry, or what's that unfolding for you at the moment?
To be completely honest, it's just come out of, personally, some challenges early this year, and I initially came across Eckhart Tolle, and then I started reading some other writers that take this, I think, non-duality perspective, which I don't, even that term non-duality takes my mind not in a very kind of productive place, but I think to roll back from that, as someone who's been interested in Buddhism for many years, I noticed with Buddhism, what always attracts me is the kind of really simple kind of instructions. What in Tibetan they call the pith instruction. It's often like 5 or 6 words. It's like a really short. This is what my brain can cope with, and these writers. So people like Rupert Spira, and there's a writer called Adyashanti in America.
Yeah, I've read several of his books.
They're often very kind of pithy. They're very brief. So with Adyashanti, I listened to an MP3 of what he called his like heart teaching, which was, maybe this is another version of surrender. He said to rest as awareness.
Yeah. That's a trippy kind of thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it does my head in. But again, maybe that's the point. I actually almost couldn't listen to it because it was so kind of just, I can feel it now as we're talking. It kind of again goes into some kind of midpoint in me. So it's not all reassuring. It's not all doesn't bathe. It's not like getting in a warm bath, but if we sit just for a moment with that term he uses, so rest as awareness, really, I think again, he's just trying to use language to take us back to being, just to being. And again, it's very clear that we can't do resting as awareness. It's not something that we can have a kind of action plan for. So the word rest is an interesting one because it kind of implies a sort of leaning back into something, a kind of almost a giving up, it's like a sigh, like an out breath.
A question that just popped into my head as you said that was, can we rest alertly? I don't know what that means or where that comes from, but it just popped into my head.
Yeah, because interestingly, he used the metaphor. He said often in spiritual teachings, they talk about, enlightenment or liberation as waking up. But he said, I want to use the opposite metaphor. He said, I think resting as awareness is like falling asleep. It's like you can't work it. So it's not about alertness. It's some other kind of capacity in us to just breathe out. Yeah, just breathe out.
Do you find yourself, I don't know, not necessarily seeking states? I don't know. There's something in this for me where at times in my life, I think it's when I'm not trying, like, I'm not trying for things, that it ends up being a byproduct of trying or something, like, or a ceasing of trying. Like, it's a really weird thing, some of the things you're pointing to here, in that I do feel, and obviously from your, almost like your extended interest in Buddhism, and your various inquiries in life,
Mm.
that maybe they have effort, and then sometimes maybe you don't have effort with them, and that's almost where I seem to not reap what I've sown, in a way, because that's too linear, and I'm once again
Mm.
trying to put an equation on something that I don't think is so linear. But there's something to it where it is in the resting, almost after a period, and then almost surrendering to the trying, that I do experience some of
Yeah.
this stuff. Like, do you get me? Like, where,
Yes. 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 I definitely resonate with that. I think one of the things recently I've been doing is learning, though, to befriend that part of me that is trying so hard. I'm trying so hard to be, and it's like I sometimes just kind of catch myself. I've got a whole pile of books of this ilk, and and I'm watching myself. Sometimes there's kind of frantic quality to it, but I think becoming more friendly with that and going, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay, and then in being more friendly with that, then this other quality that you describe kind of just sort of seeps into the context, a little bit. Not always, but it's like a kind of peacefulness with the franticness. Kind of is there. There's a very quiet kind of quality to that. And then yes, sometimes I put the books down and I kind of either literally or kind of metaphorically put them down, and there is a kind of just kind of quitting quality to that, which is actually not quitting in the way we normally think of it.
when you said that, it made me think of just like an exhale, and then like
Yeah,
a falling into this rest, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things I've learned is that can coexist with suffering. So it's
Yes.
like it's. I remember saying to a mentor some years ago, and again I was having some challenges, saying, I feel both really shit and I feel kind of okay at the same time. I
that
don't know how that's possible.
that 1,000% resonates with me. Like,
Yeah.
and then, often when people ask me how I'm doing, I'll say, I could say something like frustrated, resistant, excited,
Mm,
and flowing. Like, like,
mm,
there's a weird, like, I think if we pay enough attention to whatever is going on inside of us, and
yeah.
the sheer kind of the speed, not the speed, but the transient nature of so many of the things we're experiencing. If I was giving you a live feed of my mood, even during this conversation, it would be several things, that it would
Yeah.
just be filling up different expressions the whole time. And
Yeah.
and yes, that can happen and not feel frantic.
Yeah.
And I don't want to simplify it and say just when I'm resisting it, it can feel frantic. But when I'm desiring that to be anything other than it is, it feels far more frantic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that goes back to surrender again. It's like I get agitated with my agitation, you know, and then I'm not a happy bunny. And I think that is again a very human, but again, it's a very human thing that we do, and it's okay. We it's again um, letting that be, coming back to being. It's just letting that be, just seeing it as with as much kind of care for myself as I can. As much kind of. So even if I'm agitated agitating my agitation. If again there's a little bit of space around that to go, and I do talk to myself these days to go, yep, Duncan, here we are, it's okay, so taking care of ourselves in that very immediate way.
What do you think that? Where do you think that voice is coming from? Like, what is it like?
Yeah,
Because I experienced a similar thing as well, so I'm not going, what's
yeah,
wrong here?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can't help but think of a very old metaphor again in the Tibetan world, where they say that quality is what they call grandmotherly.
Yeah,
It's grandmother mind, and there's this image that grandmother is sat on her porch steps watching grandchildren fight and scream, play, and so the metaphor is that those little children are our emotions and thoughts, and grandmother is there. And I think it is interesting that they don't say parental mind, because obviously if you're parenting that, you're much more caught up with it. But grandma has a lot of love, but she's completely held back from, the tantrums and the agitations of those grandchildren. And so I can't answer your actual question, but it does have that quality of it, of a kind of loving but kind of separate energy to whatever I'm kind of chewing.
do you think like an emergence of that is as a result of certain inquiries, like what once again, like it's not like I'm assuming, right, that you haven't gone at one point, I really want to cultivate grandmother energy for myself, right?
No.
But this is the quality of the feeling that emerges or experiences. So while not trying to say that this is a definitive point that I've tried to experience, what would you say in your experience, or just in your own inquiries in life, has almost aided the cultivation of that?
Um, well, I would have to say the kind of people that I've been inspired by, or read, or studied with, or encountered, who either talk about that quality or they reflect it, which probably is more important that they reflect it. Not that many people I've met really reflect that, I would say. Although I do think it's a very natural capacity in us. But perhaps it's also in a very speeded up world. It's perhaps got rarer because it is hard to access that capacity when we're very speedy, I think, in our mind. So yeah, some mentors, teachers, friends, and then maybe some of the things that I've read, which point in that direction. Yeah, I'm looking now at a book on my left, going back to the monkey mind writer, Mingyur Rinpoche. He's a Tibetan teacher in his 30s, but he has that quality when you meet him, definitely.
And what brought you down the exploration of Buddhism, or even these different, like you're referencing
Mm,
Tibetan mindfulness and things like this. Like,
yeah.
what attracted you to this in the first place?
Well, I have to say, for me, if I could say, oh, a psychologist, blah blah blah, but actually, it's suffering. It's always suffering.
Yeah, it is.
If I'm having a bad time, that's my great motivator. As Eckhart Tolle says, suffering is our greatest teacher, and I definitely resonate with that. So I remember seeking out Buddhism at a time when I was in my 20s, and we were about to have the first child, and we'd moved to another country, and I was just freaking out, really freaking out, and it is suffering that does push me into exploration of this kind, and I think that's probably always been the case, either in very sharp ways or in a more background way.
Has
Yeah.
has the suffering for you opened up a love and a curiosity for it too, just out of interest?
A love and curiosity for my own suffering.
No, for even for this type of inquiry, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's suffering often kind of opens the door, and then there's a more, you start kind of wandering around, and all kinds of other parts of us get um, evoked by that. Yeah, curiosity, appreciation, and also confusion too. That can coexist with inspiration. Certainly, in Buddhist terms of Buddhism, I came into Buddhism with a lot of curiosity, but also a lot of ambivalence and a lot of confusion, and can't say that's ever been solved really.
I don't mean
Yeah.
to be a prat when I ask this, but like, does it need to be solved?
No, but on a bad day,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
sometimes,
yeah, absolutely.
it's just like I'd like to have got my Buddhist act together,
Like when I was asking the question, the reason why I felt like a prat was because I felt like maybe on the days where I'm okay with it, that question would arise, but
Yeah.
when it's not there, that's the last thing I want to hear.
Well, it's like I've noticed, whenever I go to, like, less often these days because it's all online, but when I go to Buddhist talks, I always sit at the back near the exit. And I think that's, there are other reasons for that too, but it's also just reflects my ambivalence. I'm here, but, things get tough. I'd quite like to know where the exit is.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know. A thought popped up there as you were saying though about just the suffering and it being a teacher. And I'm not trying to, just from my own sense, I'm not trying to rewire something in my head to just go, suffering
Mm,
teacher. But it did
yeah.
feel like quite a comforting thought around the idea of suffering. That here's the teacher, like like,
Yes.
and even when it's just that gentle hum, that the teacher's
Yeah.
presence is just gently there. They're not being too directive or strict or pointed.
Yes. Yes. And I've heard it said by different people, but I actually saw Eckhart Tolle say it to someone in a talk, and I thought he said it very gently and in a way that was very containing and kind, and clearly that's been his own experience, and I think it's been the experience of, when you read the biographies, a lot of people of that ilk, you can see that suffering has been their teacher. And I think when I meet people where that's been the case, they there is a different quality to them, you know, that kind of wounded healer quality, um, which resonates with me. There's a kind of, you know, they know what it's like to feel that hurt inside.
Yeah, there's it's kind of like it just makes me think of the kind of capacity we have for suffering to drive us further apart or to bring us together. And
Yeah,
and that's I don't know, there's something, there seems to be so many kind of paradoxical or simultaneous possibilities for multiple things simultaneously, which I find really really curious or just really fascinating sometimes when I'm reflecting on my own reactions to things, or even in any given day, if somebody does the same thing basically, and I can react angrily some
yeah,
days, or it could literally make me laugh out loud the next day. Like, thinking
yeah,
of my
yeah,
partner, like my missus, like, and just kind of going, yeah, I'm clearly bonkers here. Like, you've done the same thing 2 days in a row, and these are my responses.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, it's like we are bonkers in that way, and that's okay too, because it's like that's the mind just can take so many forms. Like you were saying in this call, your mind, my mind, our emotions have taken so many flavors and forms, and that's happening all the time to all of us. Yeah.
When you mentioned earlier the sense of your, perhaps even with that grandmotherly energy, the sense of befriending yourself,
Mm.
how have you noticed the quality of suffering? And I'm not saying there was a definitive line in your life where all of a sudden you befriended yourself, but how have you noticed the quality of suffering shift or altered, or have you, after having moments of befriending yourself in whatever way, and befriending suffering or
Mm.
befriending frustration or agitation or whatever it may be, how have you noticed the quality of suffering alter post, let's say, more befriending?
Yeah, I don't know is my honest answer. I can't really say. Because, I think that quality is there from birth. I can think of really difficult things that happened when I was a child. It's hard to say, isn't it? But if I take myself back there, I can have a hunch that that quality was there at 5, at 6. It was there anyway. It was there anyway. It's more like it's there all the time. Am I always aware of it or make space for it? I think it's there all the time, but it's like it's silent. So it's like if it's very noisy, you don't hear it. It's very noisy in the head, you don't hear it so well. But I think it's there all the time.
That's a that's a beautifully comforting thought, but also one that feels true. When you said that,
Yeah,
it felt like it either, not whether it necessarily opened up a space, but something felt like it was, I don't want to say, maybe engaged with might be the right word.
yeah. And if we're talking about being, we arrive in the world as beings, as human beings. So that if what we're describing is a intrinsic part of that being quality, then we are always there with that quality because it's a quality of being.
I'm not using the present moment as a, like, almost this, pull in moments of emergency, because it's sometimes in moments of emergency it might be the hardest place to arrive in or to rest in. But there is something really, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of maybe things are getting a bit, they're speeding up a bit, or things are getting a bit tense, and you can just be in a room by yourself, and all of a sudden just simply noticing everything, even in quite a deliberate conscious act, to just suddenly notice everything in the room. And then
Yeah,
even through that deliberate conscious act, once you let go of that, then actually just realizing that your entire existence is presently the room, and and
yeah,
there's something within that, then, like, that's all. It stuns me sometimes that I've had experiences where I know that's available or possible or something, and yet how
yeah.
little time I may spend, connecting with that.
Yes, and the key word is time, because actually what you're describing is stands outside time,
Yeah.
and that I think is the challenge, because we live in psychological time, which has got very speedy. Um, so it's what you just described is a step through time into something timeless.
It's like connection then with timelessness, or silence.
And silence, yeah, yeah. So, and sorry to keep mentioning Eckhart Tolle, but he's on my mind. I can actually sort of picture him saying this. He says, it's not like we've got to do this 24 hours a day. That's just too hard. We only have to do it now.
Oh God, I
And then it's like, what?
yeah, but isn't, the concept of time is a really puzzling one, or not puzzling one, but I
Mm,
think it's, in some ways, I'd even describe contemplating time as like delicious in ways, I guess, because
yeah.
when I when I've made decisions in life that no longer kind of bow to the timeline or milestones that I thought one should do something by, it almost feels like stepping out of time, like not doing these milestones in a certain sequence, or maybe even deciding not to go ahead with the milestone. And there is a
Mm.
sense in that of the construct and the pressure we create with our construct of time, in the sense of I've created this timeline for me that is putting pressure on
Yeah.
me. And when I
Yeah.
step out of it, it's not like time folds in on itself or existence folds in on itself. So I don't mean this
No.
in some, RC way of time is just a construct. I don't live like time is
No.
just
No.
a construct, but in moments it does become strikingly clear to me that there is something synthetic about our interpretation of time that breeds pressure, I think.
Yeah. And that word pressure is key here. It feels like so many of us are feeling so under pressure. And of course, we can bring a narrative to that, well, because X, Y, and Z is happening. But what you're just describing kind of undercuts that. It's like, yes, X, Y, and Z is happening, but it's happening in the context of time in a way that creates, almost directly creates
Yeah.
pressure, a sense of sort of like, and pressure in that sense of being closed in, of being, there being less space, of feeling under pressure, pressured. So I think it's not an accident that you use that word pressure in relation to time, because I think that's how emotionally, when we're very caught by time, I think that's how it can feel. Like there's not much space, space and time. There's not much space, and there's a sense of pressure.
And I think the irony then is, right, like that the more things we try, the more we try to get out of our time or make use of our time, the more time speeds up.
Yeah, yeah. And the more we try and, yeah, it's one of those kind of things. The more we try and escape it somehow, we're trying to escape the very pressure that we're trying to escape. And so it kind of, it's a painful place to be, and I have been there. It sounds like you've been there too. I guess probably all of us have been there these days, and I think it's probably accelerating a little bit because of technology and the way we inhabit our bodies and our worlds now. So speed it up.
There's a there's a beautiful thought though, like taking on what you said there from Eckhart Tolle, where he mentions like just the now. It's only now that
Mm,
time is, or it's only now that is
yeah,
occurring, and it's. I love this thought. I've had it before when reading his work, I think, where it's something along the lines of like, oh wow, we're like kind of perpetually in now. So in some ways, now is like eternal,
yeah,
and just an acknowledgement of that is quite like kind of liberating, because everything else that all the other metrics that I'm using to measure time, like, whether it's the color of more gray in my beard or my hair, or, having a daughter and her
yeah.
age is this now this, I think that there's something really lovely about the kind of eternal presence of now, not in some mind trick or escape, but there's feels like there's a truth in that.
Yeah, it's a truth also beyond even the word now, because the word now, definitely points there, but it's obviously a time-based word. Yeah, it's sometimes when I encounter him talking about that, it's liberating. Other times, it's just like blows my mind, and I don't know how to be with it. But actually, probably when I say that, it's because I'm trying to do it rather than be with it. Um, and can I do eternity now? How do I do that? Is there a book I can read on how I do eternity and do it successfully? So as well, I don't just do it. I want to be better than other people.
That's that's really good.
Yeah. Um,
How would one how would one do eternity, I wonder?
I don't know if we've got to wait till we're taking our last breath, and then we'll see. Maybe not. I don't know. I can't help but be taken into also mortality and finitude and the ending of things as well, which is sort of there in these explorations too. It's like, what you're exploring being, but I always stumble into the end, seemingly the end of my being with death as well, and that's been on my mind a lot recently. It's not always a comfortable place to be.
What kind of feelings does that, like, even you can go with when you're most comfortable or least comfortable with it? What
Yeah,
can kind of
yeah.
bring up?
Well, again, Eckhart Tolle says, there's a 1 inch gap between our birth date and our death date. In, like, if you read it on, like, Wikipedia, born 1965, died. There's a little line between the two. And actually, there's something kind of, almost funny
Yeah.
about that, because actually that little line is what we're living with, all the dramas. But in the end, that is the kind of line from a certain perspective. And I think there is almost a kind of humor to that. It's like, really, I'm making a lot of this, but really.
Yeah, it's sometimes I I love the idea of just we're on a rock, orbiting a ball of fire, um, and potentially in
Yeah,
a vast infinite universe that may be part of a multiverse. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it feels almost like not, it doesn't feel like an antidote because it's still a mental thought, like, but it does feel like it provides
mm,
space. But I do think
yeah,
that little 1 inch, the dash, like, there is something comical about it, and just the
yeah,
where we sit in the, not even just the vast infinite cosmos or universe or whatever, but just even where any particular moment or stress exists within the vast kind of sea of all our other stresses and everything that's already come and gone.
yeah,
And you do
yeah.
just kind of, I do think there are moments in life where you do just kind of get to kick back and laugh at the absurdity of it.
Yes, yes. It is tragic but comic too. And I'm sure grandmother is
Yeah.
laughing a lot as well as small. Yeah.
When you contemplate that or hold that in thought or awareness, or even ideas around mortality, like, what was the initial intrigue into even into giving that more space?
It's not really a choice. It kind of comes with the territory, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. It's not really a choice. And I don't really welcome it very easily. I don't, there's not, it's so easy for me to become a rabbit in headlights with that. I just kind of, there's a kind of terror there. Um, but I think one of the things I've noticed over the years is you can make space around that and begin to kind of at least lean into the outer edges of that feeling. And one of the ways in is through a word I love, which is
Mm.
poignancy. There's such a poignancy to our lives and to our deaths, and particularly when I think about friends of mine who've died. Of course, a lot of what I feel is that there's a poignant feeling, the last time I spoke to them, or something, some memory, or if they were here now, what would they say? And maybe it's been 20 years since they died, there's something very poignant about that.
Does death ever make, like, for me sometimes when thinking of someone that is no longer here, that's passed, that's died, kind of curious that I riffed in that order,
Mm,
but that's, I don't know. It's kind of hard and even sometimes, even when confronted with someone who's dying, like, just the once again, it kind of confronts my sense even of not. It doesn't necessarily bring up my sense of fear around the finality. It almost brings up a fear around the sense of like what's got meaning. Like I think when confronted with it, it briefly sends me into, or it untethers me from a sense of clarity of meaning or movement in my life, if you get me.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. Yeah. Me too. And that's part of the word that comes to mind, the
Yeah,
gift
yeah.
of that. Yeah. Um, and, and it stills something in me as it's still something as well as obviously that quality of just wanting to run away as quickly as possible.
So is that stilling then? Like what induces the stilling as opposed to the running away?
It's the out breath again. It's like, whew. The end of the out breath, there's a moment of stillness before we breathe in
Yeah,
again.
there's so, I don't know, throughout the conversation there's been kind of these the moments of out breath or moments, and sometimes I'm not saying that that's where the space of being exists, or I'm not trying to
Mm,
condense the sense of being into that, or surrender. But there is a kind of a still,
mm,
like there is like a gap, which even if it can be small, sometimes it can also be almost infinite by just its
yeah,
noticing as well.
yeah, and I think it's because it's such a visceral thing and it's something that happens all the time. It's got that kind of both very tangible but kind of intangible quality to it at the same time. Which let's face it, that's life, isn't it? Intangible and tangible at the
Yeah,
same time.
there's something I don't, just from what you opened up with, even just like the question of why am I suffering right now. There's something really, and then notions of like surrender, acceptance, welcoming, kind of acknowledging,
Mm,
paying attention. There's something really
mm,
lovely just about and not even just as the necessarily like like I don't mean this in some sort of mental way of reframing something like no, now it's grandmother energy, or now I'm going to
mm,
accept this moment, or
mm,
view suffering as a teacher or whatever it may be. But there's something really, and then even talking about death, there's something really nice just about just holding this, like, or just in awareness or whatever it may be, and it's
mm,
all of these things. And even we were saying about how our our we could touch on so many different feelings or experiences even just throughout this conversation, that alone the entirety of our existence, or whatever that
mm,
little dash may represent. There's something really
mm.
nice just about like, there it all is, like, and even just within this conversation, you
Yeah,
haven't you're not going to take away suffering the next time it comes, but just to kind of see where it sits within this great big mosaic of absolutely everything. Like,
yeah, and as you were talking, I couldn't help but think of dogs. You know, that sitting with a dog that's initially upset, and then maybe you hold the dog, and the dog, you can feel it in its body, kind of feels held somehow, and I think for me that is that animal in me, that animal energy, frightened animal energy that maybe we're just trying to be kinder uh, to that frightened dog.
that's as someone with a dog myself, that's a lovely, that's a really lovely notion to keep in mind. Look, Duncan, just looking at the time here, and
Yeah,
as I tend to wrap these
yeah.
conversations up with it, it is with the question of what is a good life for you, sir?
A good life is a kind life. Yeah, kind inwards, outwards. Yeah, kindness.
To whatever is emerging, and and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And and maybe surrendering whatever the hell that means, right?
Well, surrender. Let's leave that with Eckhart. That's Eckhart's word, not
We'll keep it
ours.
with
But
kindness then.
occasionally, I'll visit. I'll visit that word occasionally, but kind will do for
Look,
now.
Duncan, thank you so much for your time today and joining us on the What is a Good Life podcast. That was a really, really lovely experience and conversation for me. So thank you very much.
For me too, as well. So thank you. Take care.